Good morning. I'd like to begin this morning by sharing a true story which took place 4 years ago in North Carolina. The meeting room was noisy as the construction workers assembled one morning, and the concrete floor and the cinder block walls created an echo chamber for the squeaky sounds of metal chairs being pushed into place. Spartan furniture and a dusty bare floor were telltale signs that this room was used for crew meetings, but not much else. Some folding tables on one side of the room strained under the weight of some 3-ring binders and manuals that were stacked halfway to the ceiling. Another table in the back held coffee and boxes of donuts, most of which had already been claimed. While Russ, the lead trainer for the contractor, went to the front of the room to get the projector running, I settled into one of the metal chairs beside the donut table and tried to resist the urge to take one. Russ planned to talk to the group for the first hour, and then I was scheduled to facilitate for the rest of the class. The workshop about safety culture and leadership had been requested by the contractor's leadership team. The company recently had some serious injuries and near misses, and they were anxious to prevent another event. As Russ went through the introductory slides and started the first exercise, a burly man dressed in blue jeans and a vest abruptly emerged from an office which adjoined the conference room. I glanced up the nameplate above the open door. It indicated the man's name was Ed. He was one of the crew leaders. Ed yanked his door closed behind him, and it caused a loud thud when it met the door frame. I heard him mutter a couple of expletives as he walked briskly by my chair and walked heavily down the steps on the other side of the room. Much to my surprise, no one sitting in the metal chairs even turned around to see what the commotion was about. They acted as if it was a normal occurrence. In the front of the room, Russ cleared his throat and clicked to the next slide. When I turned back to Ed's office, I spotted a large poster taped to the outside of his door. I thought, I wonder if this poster reflects his philosophy as a supervisor. I decided to learn more about Ed before I jumped to any conclusions. At first break, I approached several of the guys and I asked if they'd be willing to share what it was like to work for Ed. After some hesitation, a few of them opened up. One fellow took a long drag on his cigarette and looked around to see if anyone was within earshot, and he told me this: the way you deal with Ed is you keep your head down and you don't ask questions. If you're lucky, you can get to your truck, be on the road before he corners you and tells you how you screwed up yesterday. The guy behind him was shuffling his feet and nodding in agreement. At the next break, I carefully questioned a few other guys. One response in particular summed up Ed's approach to people. He offered this assessment: for Ed, there are two kinds of people: those who can and those who never will. After lunch, I decided to talk with Ed himself. After all, half of the men in this class were in his crew, and I needed to hear directly from him. By the way, Ed wasn't in the class. He said he was too busy putting out fires to spend any time in anything like a safety class. Well, I knocked on Ed's door and he waved me in. After engaging in some small talk, I opened the conversation by asking Ed which guys he thought were his best workers. That's simple, he said. I need somebody who shows up on time, takes direction, and doesn't screw up too often. Anything else is a bonus. Well, I expected a response something like that from somebody like Ed. I was still taken aback. So I pressed him a bit and I asked if he was able to coach anyone who was struggling a little when they were new on the job. Heck no, he said. Look, we don't have time to babysit these guys. Either they get it or they don't. After all, you can't coach stupid. I had my answer. The poster I had seen earlier was not only humorous, it was tragic. Ed's phone came to life and vibrated on his desk, and he picked it up and motioned me toward the door. The conversation ended. I left his office with a sour feeling in my gut. Today, I'd like to talk to you about 3 general ways that you can shape your safety culture. I will also offer a dozen specific actions that you can take as a leader to shape your safety culture. These actions are part of what I call the Safety Leader's Toolbox. By the way, I list over 70 of these tools and tips in my book, Safety Walk, Safety Talk. So here are 3 general ways to shape your safety culture. Change what you think. Change what you say. And change what you do. I'm going to discuss and provide examples for each one of these 3 strategies. Let's start with examples that demonstrate what I mean by changing what you think to shape your safety culture. Psychologist Carol Dweck is credited with defining 2 very different mindsets. According to Dweck, if you have a fixed mindset, your qualities are carved in stone. You also believe people only have a certain amount of intelligence, a defined personality, and a predetermined amount of ability. In the story that I just shared with you, Ed is an example of someone with an extremely fixed mindset. On the other hand, if you have a growth mindset, you believe your basic qualities can be cultivated through your efforts. You also believe that everyone can change and grow if they simply apply themselves or are given experiences which help them to learn. Most of us can point to a teacher, a mentor, a manager, a coach who encouraged us to grow by giving us experiences that were challenging to us, yet they were achievable. Here's an initial action for your Safety Leader's Toolbox. Provide opportunities for people in the shadows. In your safety discussions, do you presume that only a few people are capable of contributing? Have you provided opportunities for others on your team? Practice a growth mindset by purposefully involving others in safety activities who may not have participated in the past. You may be surprised how they step up to the plate. Here's another tool. Set an expectation everyone can work injury-free. It all starts with you. Have you personally embraced this belief? Have you communicated it clearly? As you know, some people need more coaching than others to be successful. And I'm going to share my thoughts on this topic next. Here's a leadership approach that helps others to change what they think and therefore helps to shape your safety culture. Even if you have clearly set the expectation that everyone can work without injury, why do some people seem to be accident prone? You know what I'm talking about. It's the people who get hurt more often than their peers at work. they're the people that we think about when we label them as an accident waiting to happen or a frequent flyer. Well, there's several reasons why some people seem to be injured at a higher rate than their peers. Let's examine just one of these factors. It's the concept of the locus of control, and it was originally developed by Julian Rotter. A simple definition of locus of control is where someone places the primary causation of events in his or her life. Those who believe their life is largely controlled by outside forces are strongly external. Those who believe that they control their own life and what happens to them are strongly internal. Researchers have developed numerous locus of control assessments for specific purposes. One of these assessments that was developed by John Jones and Lisa Wupker is the safety locus of control. And I'd like to review part of their research. So participants were asked to assess how much they agree or disagree with a series of statements about accidents and injuries. So here are a few of the dozen statements on this self-assessment. Accidents and injuries occur because workers don't take enough interest in safety. Most accidents and injuries can be avoided. Accidents are usually caused by unsafe equipment. Whether people get injured or not is a matter of fate, chance, or luck, and so on. In addition, the study participants completed a questionnaire which required a description of their personal histories of accidents and injuries over the previous 6 months. And based on this questionnaire, the participants were placed in one of 3 accident groups. Those who reported no accidents, those who reported minor accidents, and those who reported major accidents. The researchers were especially interested in those who were high risk. They defined high-risk individuals as those who scored in the bottom quartile of the safety locus of control assessment. In other words, they were strongly external. An analysis showed the following. Fewer than 3% of the no-accident group were highly external individuals. This compared to 15% of the minor accident group, while 85% of the major accident group were assessed as being highly external regarding their views about safety. So, given this propensity, relationship between accidents and degree of externality, is there anything we can do to address these people who are strongly external? Yes, there is. So I witnessed how one leader changed the beliefs of his crew from externality toward internality in terms of safety. And I'd like to share his story. So Steve was an area maintenance supervisor whose crew had gone 180 days without a recordable injury, and this was truly a milestone for that group. The previous longest time between recordables had been 80 days. Steve planned a little recognition ceremony for the crew before they started their day, and I happened to be in a facility that day, and Steve invited me to attend. It was memorable. As he circulated among the craftsmen on the shop floor, he handed out some small pocket knives and thanked each person for their safety efforts over the past 6 months. And then he said something that got everyone's attention. It was provocative. You know what they're saying out there? Steve asked the group as he was handing out these knives. They're saying the only reason that we've gone 6 months without injury is we're lucky. Well, I want to know, are we just lucky? Silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Then one of the older guys standing in the back spoke up and said, "Heck no, it ain't luck," he growled. Someone else chimed in. "Who says we're just lucky? They don't know all the things we've done to achieve this milestone." Steve got the reaction he had hoped for. So, if it's not luck, then how do we achieve this? He was asking no one in particular. The discussion dam burst. One by one, different guys offered up specific things they had done to reduce their risk of getting hurt. We just used to blow off that pre-job checklist, and I know we're watching out for each other more. No more shortcuts, that's what I see. We take a time out before a tough job and think about what could go wrong. I inspect my tools now and make sure nothing's defective. That's right, Steve said. We're doing all those things. I wanted you to recognize we didn't get here by luck. We got here because you guys are doing the right things to increase your safety awareness. You're watching out for one another. You're working smarter when it comes to safety, and I'm proud of all of you. But we can do better. We had some near misses. The alligators are still out there, ready to bite us. What else can we do to keep our injury-free streak going? It was a simple but eloquent way to get the guys to connect the dots. If you do these things, you get this outcome. It wasn't luck or fate. It was deliberate and diligent actions. By getting the guys to talk about it, Steve reinforced the relationship between effort and achievement. Here's another action for your safety leader's toolbox. Set short-term safety goals based on lagging and leading indicators. Don't wait to go 6 months or a year before you celebrate, even if it's in a small way. Here's a few examples. Are more pre-job checklists being completed and not just pencil whipped? Are more safety work orders being submitted? Has attendance improved in non-mandatory safety activities? Is there an increase in your reported near misses? Are you observing less policing and more coaching for safety? Then recognize those improvements. Here's another action for you. Connect the dots between actions taken and results achieved. People with a strong external locus of control need help making an association between actions and outcomes. They need to learn that working without incidents, it's a direct result of their decisions and their actions and not chance, fate, or luck. The next time that you celebrate a safety milestone, be sure to point out the observable things that led to that achievement. Don't assume that people know why you're celebrating. Reinforce the actions that got you there. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the second way you can shape your safety culture, by changing what you say. Many of us don't fully appreciate the power of recognizing someone's effort. So some researchers set out to answer this specific question. Does acknowledging a person's effort increase their motivation to perform more work? Dan Airley and his colleagues set up an experiment like this. A stack of papers was created where letters of the alphabet were placed in random order on each sheet of paper. Participants were given a single sheet and instructed to find all the pairs of identical letters next to each other. When the first paper was completed, they were paid 55 cents. The participant was then asked if they wanted to complete the same assignment, that is, finding adjacent pairs of letters, on another sheet of paper for 5 cents less. This process continued until the participant declined to do any more work. There were 3 conditions set up in this experiment. In the acknowledged condition, each participant was asked to write their name on top of the paper before beginning that assignment. Of course, by writing their names on top of the paper, they were giving explicit ownership that this was their work. They circled all the pairs of letters they could find, and then they walked over to the experimenter and gave him the paper. The experimenter acknowledged their work by carefully examining the completed paper. He said, and placed the sheet of paper face down on a pile on his desk. He then gave the participant 2 choices. 1, work on another paper for 5 cents less, or stop and get paid for their work. If the participant requested another paper, the process continued. In the ignored condition, the participants did not write their names anywhere on the paper. Also, when they handed in their completed sheet, the experimenter didn't even look at the paper. He simply placed it face down on the desk without any kind of acknowledgement. As in the first condition, he asked the participant if he or she wanted to work on another sheet for 5 cents less or stop and get paid. The experimenters referred to the last and the most extreme setup as the shredded condition. In this case, when a participant handed in a completed sheet of paper, he or she was not acknowledged. Not only was the participant not acknowledged, but the experimenter immediately inserted the sheet into a shredder next to his desk where it was destroyed. As in the other 2 conditions, he turned to the participant and asked if he wanted to complete another sheet for 5 cents less. In the acknowledged condition, participants stopped when the pay rate fell to around 15 cents. By stopping at this point, the participants indicated doing more work was simply not worth their time. Participants in the shredded condition stopped working much earlier, at about 29 cents. These results show when we're acknowledged for our work, we are willing to work harder for less pay. Conversely, when we're not acknowledged, we lose our motivation earlier. Here's the interesting part. Participants in the ignored condition stopped working when the payment per page was only 27.5 cents, only 1.5 cents less than participants whose work was shredded. The authors of the study summarized their finding this way. You know, if you really want to demotivate people, shredding their work is the way to go. But you can get almost all the way there simply by ignoring their efforts. It's not only what you say, it's what you don't say. Imagine you're walking through a shop and you see someone using a portable grinder. You notice he's properly positioned to do the work, he's working within a restricted area, he's wearing all his PPE, his gloves, his hard hat, his earplugs, a face shield. He glances up and the 2 of you make eye contact. You keep on walking and he turns his attention back to that job. What message did you unintentionally send by not saying anything? Contrast this with the message if you simply nodded your head and gave him a thumbs up when the 2 of you initially made eye contact. What message does that send? Don't we want people to do the right thing even when no one is watching? then reinforce this behavior by acknowledging it. Here's another action for your toolbox. Look for things being done right and acknowledge these efforts. Look, we are much more likely to look for and therefore find things that are not being done correctly or safely. But there are many more instances where the work is being done in a safe and efficient manner. Seek out these and acknowledge them. Another action. Write a thank you check for non-heroic or routine tasks. What about the thousands of small but important tasks that people do every day in your operation? I call these non-heroic tasks. Here's a few examples. Someone wearing all their PPE without being reminded. A forklift operator using his horn as he approaches a pedestrian walkway. Person using 3 points of contact on a stairwell. Someone using proper lifting technique, and so many more. Write a thank you check for these things that you observe. Remember, recognition is free, and recognition should be given now, given often, and given specifically. Unfortunately, most of us hand out praises as if we're being rationed. By the way, you all have unlimited funds in your thank you checkbook. Here's another way you can shape your safety culture by changing what you say. What's your prevalent communication style? When you talk with someone who works for you, are you telling or asking? In this country, we tend to value task accomplishment more than relationship building. It's a cultural bias that most of us have. Yet, the most effective safety conversation should be initiated with an attitude of humble inquiry. What do we mean by humble inquiry? Edgar Schein coined this term, and he defines it this way: asking questions to which you do not already know the answer, building a relationship with the other person. Schein emphasizes that humble inquiry is rooted in sincere caring about the other person. And I wholeheartedly agree. I advocate that an organization's safety culture is ultimately determined by every leader's personal why. This is what I mean. If the reason you have any safety conversation is because you care about others, you will tend to use coaching and collaboration. And this approach fosters a culture of commitment. The path to a zero-incident workplace begins with leaders whose actions are rooted in caring for others. This is critically important. Here's why. Imagine you observe someone taking an unnecessary risk and stop to have a conversation. If you default to a telling mode, you will most likely direct them to explain their actions. But a better approach is to use humble inquiry and ask the person, "Can you help me understand why?" By framing the conversation this way, you are much more likely to learn about their thought process and what can be done collaboratively to change the process or for them to make a better decision the next time. Here's an action for your toolbox. Initiate all safety conversations because you care about people. There are zero exceptions to this statement. It all starts with caring. Another action. use humble inquiry to frame your conversations. One way to build trust with someone is to ask for their help. By asking, "Can you help me understand why?" you are opening the door to a better relationship. Now, let's turn our attention to the third way we can shape our safety culture and review some examples of how your actions can shape your culture. In other words, consider changing what you do. Years ago, I developed a one-page, 8-question survey to measure an organization's safety culture. Currently, I have data from over 44 organizations and nearly 6,000 surveys. Let me share a few of the questions on this short survey. When was the last time you had a personal safety conversation, one-on-one, with your manager or supervisor about safety? When it comes to safety, to what extent is your supervisor or manager a coach rather than a cop? What percent of risk-reducing ideas or solutions that you provide to your supervisor are acted upon? And here is the specific question that I would like to focus on today. How comfortable are you in stopping and talking to a coworker if you see them taking an unnecessary risk, and this is an important clarifier, even if they are more senior than you? Here's a key finding on this question from the 6,000 surveys that were completed by a wide variety of industrial organizations. In the best performing organizations, those with a strong and vibrant safety culture, over 98% of the survey respondents self-report they are comfortable speaking up. However, in organizations with an immature safety culture, up to half of employees are not comfortable to some degree saying something to a coworker. So, why are some people reluctant to speak up? Well, here are two common reasons. They may think, well, the other person has more experience or more authority than me. I'm not the supervisor. Or I'm not sure how they'll respond to any feedback. I'm not looking to get into any argument after all. To understand this propensity for silence, let's look outside of manufacturing to the aviation industry for evidence that not speaking up can have tragic consequences. A number of years ago, an analysis of commercial airline incidents showed plane crash rates are significantly different when compared across countries. Planes crashed at a much higher rate when they were flown by pilots from Brazil, South Korea, Mexico, and the Philippines, as compared to the same or similar aircraft flown by pilots from the US, Ireland, South Africa, and New Zealand. However, after ruling out variations in equipment, technology, training, maintenance, and so forth, the researchers still remain puzzled about this discrepancy in safety performance and plane crash rates. They wondered, could there be a cultural component that could explain these differences? Dutch psychologist Geert Hofstede developed the Power Distance Index as a part of his work to understand cultural dimensions. Power distance, here's a definition, is concerned with attitudes toward hierarchy, specifically with how much a culture values and respects authority. The greater the power distance index, the less likely an employee will disagree with their superior or someone who has more power than them. So to determine this power distance index, Hofstede conducted cultural surveys in nearly 24 countries. In the surveys, he asked questions like these. How frequently does the following problem occur? Employees being afraid to express disagreement with their managers or supervisors. How much are older people respected or feared? Are power holders entitled to special privileges? When Hofstede plotted the power distance index with the PDI of the pilot's native country against their respective plane crash rates, he determined there was a relationship between those two factors. In fact, pilots from countries with the highest power distance index were more than 2.5 times more likely to crash than pilots from countries with the lowest PDI. Power distance is not only a differentiating factor among nations. It can surface inside the cockpit between two people who have the same cultural background. So let me explain. In general, captains and first officers split the flying duties equally, yet plane crashes are much more likely to happen when the captain is in the flying seat. Why? Many of you have already figured this out. That's right, because some co-pilots are reluctant to challenge authority and therefore stay silent even if they think the situation is unsafe. The same concept holds true for industrial workers. Fortunately, there are actions we can take to encourage everyone to speak up. Here's one way we can do that. Just as cultural norms among nations are not the same, norms among organizations are extremely different. So imagine if we measured power distance index of the companies who had an excellent safety record, as well as the PDI of organizations who have a poor safety performance. I believe we would likely find a similar relationship between organization power distance index and injury rate as we did with the pilot crash rate studies. The overwhelming majority of employees in an organization with a low power distance index will speak up and reap the benefits of a safer workplace. On the other hand, an organization with a high power distance index fosters a culture of silence, and employees pay the price through a higher injury rate. So after the plane crash rate study mentioned earlier, the airline industry made changes to address the identified cultural communication gap. Crew resource management training is now standard in the airline industry. It's designed to teach junior crew members how to communicate clearly and assertively. The standard procedure calls for co-pilots to challenge the pilot if he thinks something has gone wrong or a poor decision is being made by using a set of escalating statements. Captain, I'm concerned about. Captain, I'm uncomfortable with. Captain, I believe the situation is unsafe. And if the captain does not respond, the first officer is required to take over the aircraft. We could take a page from the Crew Resource Training Manual and apply it in an industrial setting. John, I'm concerned about. John, I'm uncomfortable with John. I believe this situation is unsafe. And if John does not respond, work will not proceed until someone else is consulted. Here's another way to encourage others to speak up. Have co-workers ask one another this question, one person at a time. Would you watch out for my safety and speak up if you think I'm at risk for getting hurt? Why is this such a powerful question for co-workers to ask one another? Well, you're proactively giving others permission to speak up. It sends a message that you trust them to watch out for your personal safety. And interestingly, when you watch out for someone else, you actually improve your own safety awareness. So here's a simple yet powerful exchange between peers. Would you watch out for my safety and speak up if you think I'm at risk for getting hurt? I've got your six. Thanks. I appreciate it. Those of you with a military or law enforcement background will recognize I got your six means I've got your back. Here's an action for your safety leader's toolbox. Provide training on how to raise and escalate a concern. This isn't a skill that many people acquire, and when they don't have this skill, it adds to their reluctance in speaking up. Another action. Gain commitment among members of natural work groups to watch out for one another. Keep in mind, if the exchange between the co-workers that we shown earlier, it's only effective if it's done sincerely and between natural work groups. So here's another example of how changing what you do can change your safety culture. Let's talk about this notion of symbolism, how it can be used to great effect. I'm going to share a few stories about leaders who effectively use symbolism to send a message. So Gordon Bethune, who was CEO of Continental Airlines, was trying to send a message to all of his employees that the old rigid rules were history. He wanted to make sure that everybody understood, make the decision that's right for the company and the customer. To make this clear, he staged a book burning where the previous rules manual was ceremoniously set afire in a 55-gallon drum in the parking lot. The story soon spread among the employees. Message received. There's a legendary story from FedEx. One of the company's drivers was out late one snowy night to check a drop-off box for any packages. Unfortunately, when he got to the box, the lock was frozen solid and his key broke off in the lock. He tried to get inside, but he couldn't, so he drove to an auto garage. He borrowed a torch, and he cut the legs off the box, put it in his truck, and took it to the airport. There, the maintenance folks drilled open the box and put the packages on the plane. The story obviously reinforced the message that FedEx will positively do everything it can to deliver a package. Here's one of my favorite leadership stories. In 1914, Ernest Shackleton led a group whose goal was to cross the unexplored Antarctic continent. In January of the next year, their ship, the Endurance, was trapped by pack ice on the Weddell Sea, and 9 months later, the Endurance sank under the crushing pressure from the ice. Shackleton decided their only hope for escape was to head toward open water. His crew packed the lifeboats with their gear and loaded these on handmade sledges. The idea was to harness the men who would pull these sledges across hundreds of miles of pack ice. He had to let his crew know anything that would not enable this expedition to be successful had to be left behind. So, Shackleton issued an order that each man could only take along 2 pounds of personal gear. He then used symbolism to demonstrate what he meant by traveling lightly and what was non-essential. Standing where everyone could see him, Shackleton reached into his parka and pulled out a handful of gold coins and a gold cigarette case. And with a dramatic gesture, he tossed all these items in the snow at his feet. By the way, the person in the parka in that photo you see there is not Shackleton. It's his second in command, Frank Wild. Shackleton is one of the men in the harness pulling the sledge. That's another leadership lesson, to be sure. So here are some actions for your safety leader's toolbox. Be thoughtful with your message. Your words and actions matter. Or as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. And here's an action. Use symbolism to provide direction or emphasize critical issues. Back up your words with actions to make your message clear. You can say, for example, you have an open door policy, but if people come by and your door is closed, that really doesn't mean you have an open door policy. What if you actually removed the door from your office? A common theme among all the leadership strategies we discussed is communication. Indeed, effective communication skills are essential, and I advocate a 5-step process that enables anyone to lead in effective safety communication. Here's those 5 steps. Frame the conversation, assess risk-taking, discover error traps, identify the behavior, and then take action. This structured process is available in a pocket guide form. If you would like a complimentary guide, just send me a note. So today I shared 3 general ways that you can shape your safety culture. Change what you think, change what you say, and change what you do. All the concepts and tools discussed today are in my book, and there are a lot of other practical safety leadership tools that we didn't have time to get to. Thank you. And I'd invite Michelle, if we had any questions during the presentation.
Well, David, I can tell you that we had some very thoughtful chat, over 1,100 participants in your session today. From early on in the presentation, there was a question about the locus quiz that you mentioned, and the question from Karen was whether that could be given to potential new hires.
So that is proprietary to the folks who initiated that particular instrument. However, you certainly can use that train of thought when you're looking at new hires and ask a couple of questions like that as an additional screening or filtering question if you're looking for people who want to screen out highly external people.
Excellent. And I will also tell you that at least one person commented that they felt like they'd heard you speak at Safety Congress before. And as you said, you've been here a few years with us, so we're very appreciative of that. Sarah asks, how do you get people to take the blinders off when they get too comfortable and start becoming numb to the safety concerns around them?
Yeah, the classic complacency. Right? Complacency is what Sarah is referring to there, and I know we all share and have those things complacent. So, in fact, one of the things that I advocate, and a lot of organizations struggle with that, is you need to proactively reach out to people and not wait for them to reach that state of complacency. So if you think they are becoming complacent, proactively, before they reach that state, target some things where you might ask them about and might direct their attention to that mean something to them, that are specific and personal to them, and it helps break that cycle of complacency. But that is certainly a very common reason people make mistakes.
Yes, and playing into that too, just recently Jackie says, it seems harder to put these things in place with a small company, maybe less than 15 employees, that have worked together for a long time. So that takes effort when you know the coworkers as well as you do, your employees, your supervisors. You really have to work hard at this.
You do. You have to work, and regardless of the size of the organization, paradoxically, I would say, in some regards, large organizations have a different struggle. They have so many people, their span of control is large. We don't have enough supervisors to cover everyone. So how do we reach hundreds of people? The flip side of that is there's only 10 or 15 of us. Ironically, if you consistently and persistently show these kind of leadership actions, you have an easier chance because you have a smaller circle or sphere that you can influence.
And build trust.
Absolutely.
Yes. Kelly asks your thoughts on safety incentive programs, knowing it can sometimes be a touchy issue.
You mean safety disincentives? Okay. So yeah, that's fraught with potential difficulties, and that's a whole other topic. Many books have been written on that topic. I don't profess to be an expert on that. However, I would say that be careful what you are trying to incent. What is it that you really want people to do and not do? And just be thoughtful before you try to incent people to do things. There could be unintended consequences. So definitely some traps and that are existing there.
Switching gears here, Elizabeth said she was always taught that a great safety culture starts with top management. Are you saying that's not always correct?
No, I am saying that starts with top management. Having said that, there are organizations who, frankly, I can't get the C-suite on board. How do I get the executives to have the passion that I have, right? I will tell you, if you truly are a safety champion and you believe in these things and safety is a core personal value, then you can do these things as long as you recognize there will be times when that value is going to be tested by those to whom you report. But if it's a core value, you'll make the right decisions. It's helpful to have it top down, but don't stop. Don't wait to do the right things, waiting for your leaders to show you the way if you know the right way.
How interesting that you mentioned the C-suite, because later today there's a presentation on that very subject, so I hope that our guests will check that out a little bit later. Question from Mr. Galloway. How would you implement checking safety culture with different clients where our employees work at different facilities? They are a hospitality staffing agency.
Yes, well, as those who work at multi-sites can certainly attest, you can't, just because you all have a paycheck with the same logo on it and you all have the same flag flying out front, doesn't mean you have the same culture. It can be propagated depending how centralized or decentralized you are, but the important thing is it needs to be site-specific and measured site-specific. You cannot presume that one site is the same as another site, nor even organizations or work departments in the same site have different organizations. An instrument could measure those differences as well, and it's largely driven by leadership.
Any specific tips on how all of this can be implemented in healthcare and specifically nursing homes? Do you have any specific experience in that industry?
Sure. The service industry, these same principles apply. What you have to do is look for how do the situations apply to what I do in hospitality and service rather than manufacturing. But there's nothing that what I'm advocating here that cannot take this and say, how do I take this and make it meaningful for the kind of work that I do and the kind of clients and customers that we have.
Okay. I hope I'm not putting you in a difficult situation here, but what are your thoughts, Joseph asks, about John Maxwell's 360-degree leader in influencing the C-suite? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with that. Well, obviously, John is, renowned, globally renowned for culture and leadership principles. And I believe a lot of what Maxwell espouses, I would align with. In fact, what I'm advocating here, I think aligns nicely with Maxwell's principles, meaning that you need to have influencing from all around. How you do that influencing looks different depending if you are a frontline employee versus a staff employee versus an executive, but the principles still apply.
Excellent. Okay. Behavior-based programs. Have you experienced or seen any that are especially successful that you can share with our audience?
So I don't want to single out the answer, as I'm familiar with behavior-based safety in several programs, and I would not want to single one out. Having said that, some of my clients, about half have a behavior-based safety, the other half do not. And I will share with you my thought on this. This philosophy, of leadership, it applies whether or not you're doing behavior-based safety observations or not. And it applies to people who are peers as well as people who are supervising or directing others. So it makes no difference what kind of organization you have and what other safety processes you have. Leadership is leadership is leadership, and these principles are timeless in my view.
I understand. And it applies to every aspect of our life, not just work.
Yes, it does.
Well, in closing, I would like to let you know that there was one particular quote of yours today that resonated, and that is that there is unlimited funds in our thank you checkbook. And another attendee today, Amber, says that she, from a previous Safety Congress experience, took the advice and makes it a point every single day to thank someone for their work, for their effort, for their attention, and it has paid off dramatically for her. So thank you, Amber, for mentioning that.
Thank you.
And thank you, David, for being here today and joining us for the OSC, the first ever OSC online event.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for joining us. Of course, you know, to conclude this session and evaluate this session, and then enjoy the videos that we have during the lunch break, and we'll see you back this afternoon. Have a good day.